Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is a fellow Aussie, Emma Dean, who is the Area Director for Asia Pacific, Middle East, Africa, North for the British American Tobacco. We're just talking about what a fantastically long title that is, Emma. Fantastic.
It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful.
It's great. So, Emma, thank you very much. And you've had quite a long career in the sort of consumer goods area. But let's sort of go back a little bit and pick up your career and then bring it forward to today. And then we'll start getting in the nitty-gritty of what you learned. Because you've actually been outside of Japan and outside of Australia. So you've got some comparative things happening there in terms of your perspective, insights and observations about what's going on here. So how did you wind up in this whole industry?
Yeah, indeed. So let's take it right back to the beginning. So I was actually born in the UK, but grew up in Australia. In my heart, I'm Australian. Right. So I started work in the late 90s with Nestle in Australia. So a very famous CPG company known around the world. I worked for Nestle for about 8 years in a variety of sales and category type roles.
What made you choose, the consumer goods area in Nestle? What made you go for that area?
When I was studying at university, I studied marketing and public relations when I was in Australia. And I actually took on a sales graduate position. So many companies open up these graduate opportunities when you start. And I found that I loved that sales environment, that, you ride the roller coaster in sales, the highs and the lows, but I found that it was an area that I was thriving in and I really enjoyed. So that kind of got me into CPG originally. And it's kind of stuck with me for 26 odd years.
Yes, well, you're still hanging in there with it and getting bigger and bigger every time.
Indeed.
Yeah, and then after Nestle, what happened?
So Nestle, in around 2006, I joined Unilever. I was still working in Australia at that time, and I joined Unilever working out of their Sydney office, but very quickly they moved me to New Zealand. New Zealand's a fantastic country, and for me that was a fabulous experience. Smaller market, so bigger responsibility and fabulous opportunity. And then after about 3.5 years, I moved to China, also with Unilever, which was
a big jump from New Zealand to China, isn't it?
Indeed.
This is what, in Shanghai?
It was in Shanghai. So I went from a country of 4 million to a city of 24 million. So it was a little bit of a shock to the system. But China was fantastic. What was meant to be a 2-year stint in China turned into 6. Wow. 3 different roles, all still with Unilever. Wonderful experience. I always talk about that being quite a step change in my career. That experience.
I mean, China's in many ways like growth, Wild West, lots of exuberance. Yeah. Highways appearing out of nowhere. Yes. Bridges appearing out of nowhere, type of thing. So constantly changing. Yeah. That must have been quite different from, say, Australia and New Zealand, which are a bit more sedate. And so after China, then what happened?
So China moved back to Australia, and I was still with Unilever at that stage working, and I branched out a little bit then into our kind of e-commerce, emerging channels business with Unilever. The experience in China, kind of how they leapfrog some of these more traditional CPG approaches, that was really brought to the fore in Australia, which was great. And then in about 2019, I decided to take a bit of a career break, and I took about 6 months off, still based out of Australia and spending some time just really thinking about what next. And then
Was that because you were just absolutely burned out from all of this hard work?
To be honest, it had been about 21 odd years at that stage, and I was having to think about, what next, really? I've got a lot more working years in me. What do I really want to be doing? And Unilever was going through a bit of a change at that time, and we had a really very nice parting of the ways together, and for me it was a good opportunity to take a reset.
It's not so easy to do in the corporate world, I have to say.
It's really not, and I've always spoken very highly of both Nestle and Unilever as organisations, and I think if you've had a great opportunity with an organisation, leaving on great terms is wonderful, and that was what I got.
And so you have a little bit of a break, and then what happens?
Had a bit of a break, started fielding a few calls from some recruiters, and took a call about a company that was transforming in an industry that was transforming, and it sounded fascinating, and it sounded for me something that I could sink my teeth into, and I could really see where I could add some value and have some impact, and that was British American Tobacco.
And were you a smoker?
In my youth. So I smoked for about, let's call it 16 odd years. I haven't smoked for probably 12. So it's been a long time ago.
Well, it's interesting because, I've dealt with different tobacco companies here. And in the first, probably 10 years ago, 15 years ago, everyone was smoking.
Yes.
And then when you meet them today, nobody's smoking because there's all these alternatives.
Absolutely.
That they've come up with, So it's really been quite a step change, actually, in the industry.
100%. You're spot on. And I think that for me was really the trigger of why I wanted to join BAT. It's been a company that's been very successful in one space for many years, but actually the move that we're making, the transformation that we're doing now into these new products, these reduced risk products, that's very compelling to be part of that. An industry that needs to change and wants to change. That for me is an important thing and to be part of from the inside. So that's why I joined. Yeah.
And so BAT, and this posting is in Australia at that time?
Actually I officially joined in the Australian business, but after about 5-6 weeks moved to Hong Kong, which was always the plan.
Oh, I see.
But interestingly, a slightly different role. So I signed up to be a regional marketing projects director for BAT, working out of the regional office in Hong Kong. But very quickly, they went through some changes in personnel in what used to be the Asia Pacific area. And I took over as head of marketing in August 2021. So
it was a big opportunity.
Yes.
Sometimes when you have these recreations of the structures of companies, you wind up at the wrong end of the change, or you're out of a job, actually, in a lot of cases. Yes. Something changes at the top and next thing the elbow's coming your way. Yeah. But in fact, in your case, it's gone the other way.
Very different. It was
the springboard straight to the bigger job.
Correct.
So fantastic.
Yeah. So right place, right time.
Yeah.
And I worked in the Asia Pacific area for about 18 months. Then an opportunity came up to come to Japan, and Japan for me was always a place I'd wanted to come and live and work. My husband and I used to travel here and holiday here quite a bit. Now, clearly working and living in a place is very different from holidaying in a place, but Japan always felt very different from many places that I'd operated in before.
Certainly different from Shanghai and Hong Kong, and we were in Auckland in New Zealand.
Yes, correct.
Auckland, quite different to those three spots.
Correct. So it was just something that we'd always talked about, and a number of years previously I'd had an opportunity and an offer to come and work in Japan when I was with Unilever, and the timing just didn't quite work for us, and I always felt that perhaps I'd missed out. But with BAT, that opportunity came back up. So I joined the Japan business officially in November 2021, but the borders were closed. So we didn't officially land into the country until March 22.
Wow. So we stayed in Hong Kong during
I stayed in Hong Kong, so
and
I did the job remotely.
Were you doing it remotely? That's like super remote, isn't it?
I think COVID has proven that we can work virtually, but I wouldn't encourage anyone to do it for 5 months in a different country. It's quite challenging.
Well, it's not too bad time zone wise.
It's an hour difference, so not bad. But
difficult though, difficult. You're not seeing the people.
Correct.
Particularly you're taking on a new role where they don't know you.
Absolutely.
You don't know them, particularly with Japanese. Japanese, they want to look at you. They want to sense you, hear you, feel you, so they can feel comfortable with you. And they can't do that very easily on a monitor.
Yeah, more difficult.
Much more difficult. Yeah.
So then finally got to land in the country, which was fabulous. And so did that role for about a year. And then, as many companies do, we went through a slight restructuring in terms of our regions and our areas. And I took over from my boss, James Yamanaka, who you've had on your show previously, in April 2023. And I've been doing that ever since.
Wow. Okay. So this has been quite a rapid rise.
It's been a whirlwind.
a whirlwind. And so, thinking about your experiences before, particularly outside of Australia, with Hong Kong, China, and then you come to Japan. So you have a certain familiarity with how things work in Asia, and there are similarities across Confucianism as one of the parts of the philosophies in Japan too, hierarchy, but there's a big difference, I think, in the energy in a country like China, which is so hungry, and Hong Kong's always hungry. Hard to accuse Japan of being hungry, I would found in my experience, but it's got different things going for it. So when you first arrived, what was your plan? Like you got the role, but you're sitting in Hong Kong. You're not really here. Now you're here.
Yep.
What was your plan to how am I going to come in and take this over? How is this going to work?
Yeah. I think with my approach to getting into a new role, and particularly into a new role in a new market, is all about immersion. So it's about connection, meeting as many people as you can, talking to as many people in the team as you can, and trying to really get a feel of the place. I know it sounds, it's not rocket science. It's a very simple approach.
But how many people are in this operation in Japan?
So in our total organisation at APMEA North, there's about 1,300, including our factory down in
It's hard to get your arms around 1,300 people and give them a big hug, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's opportunities of one-on-ones, cohort connects. I run a session. In fact, I did one yesterday.
What does a cohort connect turn into? What is it? I can understand the words in English, but I'm just trying to visualize, what does a cohort connect mean?
So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I ran what we call a Let's Talk session with myself and our head of HR. And we gather together 8 or 10 different members of the organization. We sit and have a coffee and open up the floor to whatever you want to talk about, whatever's on your mind.
Now, that's interesting because generally speaking, it depends. I know you've got a very multinational, I forget how many nationalities you say, 30 or something?
We've got 25 in Japan and 30 across the entire patch, different nationalities working.
So that's a very diverse group. So
Indeed.
In any diverse group like that, you're bound to have people who will speak up, but often with Japanese, you can get them in the room, you can ply them with coffee, but they're often hesitant to speak up.
Yeah.
I guess it's generational too.
Absolutely.
So was this group of a certain generation? Were there a certain, diversity mix so that someone kicks it off?
Yeah.
The Japanese can come in after it.
Correct.
They are not so keen to be the leader to kick it off. Most cases, this is not blanket everybody, but generally, generally speaking, they're a little bit shy.
Yes.
So how did that go?
I think the way that we've been doing it is, and you and I have met on a number of different occasions, I'm quite an open book. I have a lot of energy. I like connecting. And so I think the organisation, given that I've been here for a couple of years now, know me a little bit, even if they haven't had a huge amount of one-on-one time with me. So we do try and make it as open and connected as we can. So normally I will start and talk a little bit about my career, what I like to do, and give them a bit more about me. And I think that's always a nice starting point because it gets them to feel a little bit more comfortable. I normally share a few things around, my guilty pleasures or my embarrassing things to break the ice a little bit.
Also humanised too, isn't it? Because often in Japan, the boss is on a fairly high pedestal.
Very much so.
And, age, seniority, status is important here. So the boss can be sort of above the clouds in many ways, but you're bringing the cloud cover down a bit.
Trying to do that.
Mix it in.
Trying to do that. And I do. You tap into a really good point here. I think it's not necessarily a comfortable thing when you are typically expecting someone to be up here and they want to come and have a conversation with you. But in a positive way, I get a lot of feedback of, I've never had that opportunity before, or I've never had that time before. So we're trying to break some of those barriers. It's always a good starting point to open it up to team members that are going to perhaps be more open to doing that, because then that discussion filters into the organisation where people can be saying, it wasn't scary, I didn't feel like I was under pressure, or it was much more casual. And the more we do it, the more that filters into the organisation so that people start to be interested and want to participate.
Well,
but it takes time.
That famous book, In Search of Excellence, by Peters and Waterman, talked about management by wandering around, which was a term no one had ever heard of before. And they observed this in their role as consultants in companies, and they sort of put that into the book, and it became a thing.
Yes.
The thing about Japan, though, is, if you suddenly start turning up and wandering around and you go to the people below your direct reports or even down the line, a lot of people get very nervous.
Yes.
What did she talk about?
Yeah.
What did she say about me? What did you say about me?
Yes.
What did she tell you? So there's that sort of, in a way, in a lot of organisations, information control is part of your status and part of your authority.
Yes.
And then someone like the boss starts come underneath you and then starts talking to your people. People don't see it as necessarily a positive. No. So do you set that up? Do you let people know this is things I like to do? I'm not going to undermine you.
Absolutely.
I'm not there to spy on you.
Yes.
I'm not going to undercut you. I'm just interested to meet people. Because if you set it up, that's one thing. But if you suddenly just turn up, and if you're coming sort of from a Western environment, you might just turn up and not know that people are going to be nervous. So how did you approach it?
Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's about making sure that we are, through the organisation and through the different layers of the organisation, bringing that communication and that visibility that's coming through. We, for the first time in Japan since pre-COVID, had a multi-area town hall. in a few months ago this year, and it had been a long time. The team hadn't all come together. And
this is how many people?
So about 650 odd in Japan, and then the rest of the organisation dialing in virtually from different areas in Korea and Taiwan.
Well, even 650 in the one place is incredible. When was the last time I saw 650 people in one place? You know?
And it hasn't been done certainly for years because of COVID and bringing that group together. But at that point, I also talked about the fact that I want to hear the voice of the organisation. I want people to feel comfortable to share their viewpoints, bring the ideas. And again, as you've pointed out, that's not necessarily a comfortable place to be for Japanese employees. They're not necessarily going to put their hand up and speak openly into a group. But if you continually talk about this as an approach, as a way that we're going to build a culture of connectedness in the organisation, it does start to filter through, and you will get a few people who will start to lean in and engage.
Well, they all talk to each other too. You know, you might meet a group of 8 or 10 or something, and all their colleagues, what happened? How was it? What's she like? What did she say? What happened? How'd you go? And they start to realise, well, it wasn't scary.
Yes.
She's not here to delete me.
Yeah.
She's actually want to find out what I'm doing.
Yes.
And it was pleasant, and she's nice. And then people, okay, this is not as scary as I thought it was going to be. So if they get a chance, well, they might think I want a chance.
Yes, I'd like a
So
go.
that's ripple effect is important,
Absolutely,
isn't it?
absolutely. And I think it's, I often say here, I have an open door policy. Now, again, that's quite uncomfortable for many people. If I'm never going to walk in and do that. But the more people that they can see doing that, the more normalized that becomes. So there's a clashing of worlds. There's the extremes. It's Australian energy, non-hierarchical, very direct, my style. But I think the ability to then flex into what that means for any market that you operate in becomes super critical. And I think we're starting to blend those worlds here a little bit.
So you talked about total immersion to get an idea, and you sort of enter the company. So you've been here a little while now, and you're in a marketing role before you stepped up to the main role. So you had you were a known quantity as well. And before you stepped up, you didn't just land on a plane literally from out of nowhere, but they knew the role you were playing. But in terms of what have you found has worked well to get a Japanese team engaged, to follow your leadership? Because as the leader, you're going to set the strategy, direction, the culture, all those sorts of things. And you want people to come with you on that journey. Now, for them, they can, the minute you join, the stopwatch starts of how long she's going to be here, because they know you're not Japanese, you're not going to be here forever. So at a certain point, you're going to be getting on a plane and going somewhere else. So they know it's not a permanent posting, but you're going to be here for a number of years. So how do you get people engaged to follow you? What have you found works well?
I think the point that you've just made is a really critical one to tap into, because there is a sense of people parachuting in, doing their 2 years, only caring about what they get next. And
the infamous seagull leadership, right?
And jumping in and out. So I think there's a real essence that needs to be built with the organisation, that you are here to build something better. You're here to work with the team on the ground, and it's not about kind of jumping in and jumping out. Now, that's not an easy thing to do, because the reality is you won't be here forever. I won't be here forever. But it's about making sure that the team have a belief that you are with them and for them, and not to kind of drive your own agenda. I think there's also a piece around making sure that there's belief in the organisation about what you're trying to do. Now, Japan is very consensus-led in terms of everyone wants to kind of get on the same page and move in the same direction. But without a belief in where you're going, you'll have kind of this quiet descent of, I'm not going to tell you I'm not on the train, but I'm not on the train quite clearly.
I'll keep a low profile.
I'll just, keep doing what I'm doing, and you can keep talking the way that you're talking. So it's important to make sure that we're connecting, and I am connecting into the organisation, trying to get a pulse of where people are at, trying to get a sense of what's working, what's not working. And I'll be very transparent. It's been a couple of years for me here. There's some things that have gone really well. There's some things that have been doozies as well as you've gone along that journey. So I think it's about learning and iterating, and that immersion helps, but also asking the questions, asking for feedback as much as possible. And again, not everyone's comfortable doing that, but you will get it from people in the organisation, and that's important.
Well, we're coming from Australian culture, Western culture, where we're very agile.
Yes.
And particularly Australians, they're very good at crisis management for whatever reason. Maybe we're sometimes creating the crisis so we can manage it. That's not so good, but pretty good at that. And so flexibility, speed, agility, we got all that going for us. So we tend to move quickly.
Yep.
But Japanese have got this high risk aversion, and they want information, they want detail, they want to know everything, or think about every possible thing could go wrong before we make a move. So you've got this tension between a need for speed on the leadership part and a Japanese follower need of, well, be cautious, get all the data, analyze it, make a really a good consensus decision, considered decision where we're going to go. So how do you manage that tension between those two styles, I'll call them?
I think it was probably, if I'm being super transparent, it was the most confronting thing about coming here and leading the organisation, that massive difference between my style, my background, which also, in fairness, worked well in China because China's hustling.
Yeah, hustling, right? Yeah.
And here, which is much more around really explain the why, to a very, very deep level, a lot of detail, a lot of understanding around that. I'm a much more style of, let's just try it and let's see what happens. And that can be quite uncomfortable, and those two things coming together.
Well, you can say that, but as you just said, they may not do anything about
correct.
it. Very interesting. I'm not touching it in case I break anything, something,
And I think you talked about it as fear of failure. I also think it's more, or is it of an equal element of not wanting to let anyone down. I do think there's this real pride in the work that happens in Japan. And so no one ever wants to give people a bad experience or an experience that they feel like is not the level that they would want to be delivering. So there is this real, to the nth degree. And I'm kind of like, if it's 70% good enough, let's go. But there's a cultural element here of actually 100% is the minimum that you should be delivering, because that's perfection. That's the craftsman approach.
Well, we talked about this the other day about, I can't ever understand people thinking they bring in so-called minimum viable product launches for Japan. Like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
If it isn't perfect, no one's going to go for it. If they go for it, they're going to just kill you in terms of brand destruction. And I remember when I worked in the National Australia Bank here, I was running the National Australia Bank in Japan. There was a Canadian guy who was the COO, and he was trying to explain to the admin team who do the back office, and banking's a highly regulated area, that 80% would be fine.
Yes.
Just looking at him, I knew he didn't speak Japanese. Yeah. I knew they are not buying this 80% jive at all, because as far as they're concerned, highly regulated industry, their job in the back office is perfection, no mistakes, every I dotted, every T crossed, and thank you for your interesting idea, but no thank you. So this is also the burden of having to bring the team with you when they've got that preference for this caution. Yeah. So have you found any way of speeding things up at all?
Yeah, I think the biggest, big learning curve for me in that early part was my pace versus the organization's pace and willingness to move at that. So we've adjusted, and I've certainly adjusted my pace in some respects. What I have learned through mistakes and a few train wrecks along the way here is really articulating the why and helping people understand the impact on them, why it's going to be better, what this will mean. And as you say, providing probably a little bit more detail than I would in other areas is absolutely critical.
And what about getting that why message, that purpose message down to the very bottom? Because often the metaphor I use for this is a sponge on the top, but concrete on the bottom. Yeah. So the middle management are sponges to suck up everything from senior management. Yes. They are informed, they want to know what's going on, but they're very, very poor at actually filtering it down to the people at the bottom. So we at the top think, well, I've explained the purpose, I've given the why, I've gone into great detail about this, everyone knows. But in fact, when you deep down and dive to the bottom, you often find that people don't know or don't understand or misunderstand, because their middle management is not actually being a good conduit to pass that message down for whatever reason. So have you found any ways to get around this?
Yeah, and this has been something that we've experienced as well. We have what we call here the extended leadership team, so the direct reports of my direct reports, to oversimplify. And we're trying to harness that cohort a lot more strongly to really understand the detail behind the why and what we're doing, and equip them with the right information and the right resources to be able to do that. The reality is we still have that challenge all the way through to, the person that's calling out on a store in the field.
Part of it's power too, isn't it? Part of,
information,
it's status, power, control, authority is tied up in that access. I know something you don't know. That's because I'm the boss, follow me. So it's hard to break that out, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think my style and trying to dive into the organisation to break those barriers is an approach. I think my leadership team is working through that also. But whenever I go out into the market, if I was in Osaka a couple of weeks ago visiting the team down there, and we had some really interesting conversations because they would question me, why did we do this? And of course, I'm sitting there going,
thinking,
goodness me, how has that not come?
Yeah.
But then that's also an opportunity, and I see that as an opportunity for me to say, okay, instead of filtering the information, let's talk directly about what that means. And I think we underestimate sometimes the ability of people to understand the concepts that we're talking about up here, and the more we can be open about that, the better, I think.
And what about getting ideas? Because, I suffer from this problem. I'm going to put my hand up as a problem in the sense that I have lots of podcasts I listen to. I read lots of stuff. I've been in different industries. I've been in business a long time. I'm an ideas person. I enjoy it. So I'm pumped up with ideas all the time, I'm just bang, bang, bang. And sometimes you're trying to drive these ideas into business and then you think, well, hang on a minute. The only person's coming up with any ideas around here is me, and I'm actually not getting their ideas because I'm too busy pumping up my own ideas and trying to execute on them. So sometimes you have to step back and think, well, okay, do I have to be the sole source of ideas here? Can I get some ideas from the team? So what have you found works well to sort of harvest those ideas from the team?
Yeah, and again, this is a really interesting one because my style is also a little bit more, I love having a seat at the table. I love, Coach,
I think
pick
we
me.
We could be twins here quite easily. I can see that. Yeah,
it's that because I love being involved. I love being part of those conversations. But what I've also found is that can hamper the organisation if I'm too involved, because they'll just wait. Emma will say something. Emma will talk about something, and then we'll jump on board and we'll make that happen. So I've actively stepped back, particularly even with my leadership team, to say, you come to me if you need me, but I'll move back a little bit, and I think that gives space. I think one of the challenges that we have, and particularly in our organisation, but I don't think it's unique to us, is we're moving at such a pace that we need to carve out time where people can have that moment to go, can I think about something new? Can I learn something new? Can I be a bit curious? So we've carved out dedicated learning time within the week where people are given that opportunity to say, look, no one's going to schedule a meeting over the top of this. We have a really fascinating.
So this is actually like, for example,
we call it.
I'll make it up. Thursday from 2 to 6 is no meetings, thinking time.
It's Friday 10 till 11. We call it dedicated learning hour. And this is a time where people can then read stuff, go and learn something new. Really, we've got this fabulous platform, digital platform called The Grid, where you can access a whole array of training materials, articles. We also get access to LinkedIn courses through that. So there's this ability then to go out and look and think. But if we don't carve that time out, people will fill that time with doing. And so emails, making a PowerPoint slide, which we love, all of those things which suck up time. So we're trying to carve out ways to allow people to have a moment to step back from their day-to-day and go, what could I be thinking about here? And I think the other element is celebrating those things, acknowledging and recognizing people who've put their hand up and popped their head up a little bit, and making that something that's to be celebrated. And I think the more we can do that, the more others in the organisation will start to think that that's something that they're also interested in doing.
Have you come up with any sort of formalised brainstorming methodology or template or anything like that?
I think we've tried a whole raft of some of the, we've done some of these design thinking kind of approaches. But I think what's more important is getting smaller groups of people together just to have the time. I know it sounds very simple, but actually getting people in a room together to kind of chew the fat, I think can make a massive difference versus, frameworks and templates and approaches. But we've tried a whole raft of things in this organisation. I think what I think comes out mostly is when you get a couple of bright, sharp minds in the room who can have a chat with one another for a bit, then you can start to create something.
Well, thinking is hard work. I mean, we have a methodology we use for brainstorming, and it requires that you brainstorm in silence initially on your own. And there's no evaluation of the ideas you come up with, but you have to sit there, perfect silence, 15 minutes. Now, you'd be surprised. A lot of people can't take that. They can't not speak for 15 minutes. They're like looking at their watch, they're jitty, they're like,
I'm ready to go.
I've done my 4 ideas, I'll move on, you know. But you find that having to sit there, like the first 5 minutes, you get a few ideas down, and then it gets real hard after that. The next 10 minutes is really like your brain is starting to hurt because you've really got to think. But you need time. You need that hour sequestered away, no interruptions, but it is hard work, and that's probably why most of us avoid it.
Yes.
But the essence of that is that you can explore things that normally you're just breezing by because you're busy. To actually focus on and go a bit deeper in things. It's much better, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what about in terms of building trust? You know, you're a woman, you're a foreigner.
Yep.
You've come from other companies.
Yes.
You're not, you know, BAT from the time you're at uni and you join the company.
Yes.
So, you know, you're going to be here for a limited number of years and you're posting, etc. So what have you found works well as a leader to build trust with people?
Yes. So I talked earlier about, for me, it's about if people know me a little bit more, can eyeball me and understand a little bit about who I am, that's the base starting point. So it's important. And I probably overshare for Japan in terms of my life and what I'm doing. But I think that helps to, you referred to, it brings a bit more of a human approach to what we're doing. And I think that's an important starting point. I think this other piece around, particularly for Japan, again, I love the debate. I love being in the room and the challenge and the discussion and what about this and have you thought about this? Now, often in Japan, that can be incredibly confronting. And even a question can feel like a test.
Attack.
And it can be a genuine question. And I'm all about asking questions. But quite quickly, I realized that for some people, that's a question is taken very much as a negative, even if it's a genuine curiosity piece. So I think for me, it's been a big learning around managing my audience and making sure that my behaviors in front of different levels of seniority pivots in that space, that I'm not, challenging junior members or questioning junior members. Because even if I think I'm genuinely interested and I want to know, it can often be seen as quite confronting to have to answer that question.
Why do you think it's confronting for them? What's making it confronting? Because if you and I were with a bunch of Aussies, and you did that, they'd be into it. They had no hesitation because that's the culture.
Yeah.
But what do you think it is that's making that a confrontational point for them?
I think perhaps there's a point around, because culturally people are genuinely, if you're going to present something, the expectation is you'll listen and you'll nod and then you're done. That's probably a good presentation. Whereas I actually think the debate and the discussion is a good presentation, where you're feeding off one another and you're talking about those things. And I think those two differences are quite stark here. And so I think it's almost seen as if I wasn't able to get through my presentation with no questions, my presentation has been a failure.
You think?
I think that's what the people here are thinking. Whereas my view is actually the more we can interact during that presentation, the better it's going to be, because you'll get the richness out there. So again, I think it's different levels of seniority are comfortable with that. And I think for the junior team, I need to think about what's the type of question I'm asking, but also making sure I frame it in a way of, that was really interesting, I really liked how you've done this, and helping to shape that a little bit more, to give comfort that the question isn't a challenge, it's a genuine question.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. And sometimes I think Japanese worry that they're sitting in a room and they've got people who join the company before them. They've got people who are older than them.
Yes.
And often, I don't know about in the case of BAT, but in many companies, women will, see men there and think, well, the men should be answering that rather than me. I'm only a woman type of thing. So they're holding themselves down. And also the problem of, she's asked this question, do I have a perfect answer for her question? And invariably, no one has a perfect answer for anything.
Exist.
So you're always falling short.
Correct.
And then you're thinking, well, I don't have a perfect answer, so I better keep my mouth shut. Or if I do say something, people are going to laugh at me and rib me later about what a dill I am because a stupid question, I came up with stupid answer. I came up with an intelligent question. I'm going to look bad. So the safest way to go forward is to be very low profile and not speak. So often we find in our classes, as a training company, if we ask people for their opinion in Japan, no one wants to give an opinion. So we sort of play with it a bit. We say, okay, write down what you think. And we give them time.
Yes.
And then we don't say, well, Emma, what do you think? Paralysis is there. Australia, I don't want to say anything. We ask them, what did you write down? That little nuance difference. They tell you what they wrote down because they had time to think about it. They've actually written something down. They're just telling you what they wrote down. It's getting the same result, but the approach, angle change, makes it more comfortable. It doesn't take that much longer anyway. You're not losing a big time problem there. But we found that for Japanese, that's a much more productive way, a richer way of getting feedback. So it works well.
No, I think it's a good point. And I think also, again, there's no part of me that thinks that there aren't ideas, opinions, viewpoints in the room. I know there are. It's understanding the best way to extract those ideas and those opinions in a way that's comfortable and doesn't feel pressured.
And what about culture? You have the BAT culture, global. You have BAT, APMEA North.
Yes,
You have, I did pretty well, remember that.
You did well.
You have Japan culture.
Yes.
And then you have APMEA culture.
Yep.
So what have you found works well to build a culture that aligns everyone together to fly in formation in the same direction in a positive, happy manner?
I think one of the, if I think about where I spend my time, number one is people, talent, people development. That's where I spend a huge bulk of my time, rightly so. And hand in hand with that goes the culture. How are the team feeling? What's important to them? Are we all on the same page? Can I look out into the organisation and are the broad swathe of the employees thriving? Again, I think for me, it's gone back to a little bit of understanding what's important in this environment, what's important to this group. With my leadership team, again, it's about connection. We get away, we spend time together, we give each other very structured feedback. We do a lot of speed dating feedback, which again is not, I found with BAT, it's not necessarily something that was ingrained in the culture of providing feedback, but it's a bit of a buzzword. I honestly think feedback's a gift. You tell me things that are helping you, great. You tell me things that I could do better that would help you more, that's even better.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, the feedback, in a way, has got a bad reputation because it's usually a download of all your sins, misdemeanors, shortcomings and failures. It's all negative and you're like getting hit by this big wave of it. It's like you don't like it. However, for example, in Dale Carnegie, we do not allow any critique because we often are using feedback in the classes, but we very carefully corral that and we say to people, okay, we're going to give feedback and we're going to do it in two ways. We're going to tell them what they're doing well first. And then after that, we're going to tell them how they could do it even better.
Correct.
So it's always on that front foot positive.
Yes.
But people will revert to the critique and we stop them. We say, no, tell Emma what she's doing well.
Yes.
And then tell her how she can do better. And we stop them. And once you start to have that environment where the feedback becomes not fearful, it's not a pain point for you, you're more likely to give and receive it because it's on the front foot rather than the back foot. You're not having to justify the wave of negativity you're getting.
Absolutely. It's a big one. And I think when I first came into the organisation, we had this format of a 360 feedback form and people saw that as punishment. If I'm being asked to do that, it means I'm in trouble, which is awful, because you lose all that richness that comes with it. So we're trying to normalize feedback as something that actually helps us all kind of lift the water level. So that's been a big one. I think the other piece as well is what I think is what the culture for me, if I could create the perfect world for me, isn't necessarily true for the broader organization. And the reality is, in Japan, we have 25 different nationalities working on our business. Across the patch, it's 30. So you've got this wonderful melting pot of inputs and approaches and how people want things done. So it's important about connecting with the organization. We actually kicked off a piece of work last year with just some Japanese team members to say, in this office, how do you want it to feel? What do you want it to look like? And actually, after I've got this session with you today, I'm going out on what's called a buddy lunch. So we've paired everyone in the building up with people that they may have never met with, and the company will pay for them to go out and have lunch together. It's an opportunity.
1,300 lunches is a lot of lunches.
It's an opportunity. Nice. From a cost versus what we'll get out of it at the end is amazing, because you're letting people connect. One of the bits of feedback we got post-COVID was people went away and had to work virtually for a period of time. Now, actually, during that period, people changed, new people came into the organization, people left. Yes. When they came back to the office, they realized they didn't know half the people on the floor. And no one's comfortable to go, hey, I never met you, I'm so-and-so.
Let's go and have lunch together or something.
Right. So we're creating environments where people can, in a more comfortable way, in a more structured way, build that connection. And the feedback that I've got so far has been really great, because people are like, I met this person from ops, or I met this person from finance who I've seen them, but I've never spoken to them. We're just trying to break down some of the barriers that we've, I think, created for ourselves.
Well, I mean, it lends itself to barriers anyway, doesn't it? Because you're in your section doing your piece of the work, and you're with a certain group of people all the time, and you just don't tend to meet people from other sections because you're pretty busy.
Yes.
But the whole thing about diversity is diversity, with DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. The idea is that diversity leads to something better.
Yes.
And more creativity, because you're having different, educational systems, experiences, countries they've come from, viewpoints, and the individuals adding something that maybe locals wouldn't see. Yeah. And that helps to make it work. Absolutely. So you've got 35 and you're at 25 here. But how do you do that? Because we were talking before about, the Japanese can be very sequestered and they're very cautious and they take their time. Yeah. But when you've got someone working with you who's not like that, in a way they sort of tend to drive you a little bit to step it up, and you realise, well, I've got to move it along here because they're really rocking along and I'm being left behind, and maybe I've got to change what I'm doing a little bit. It can be a positive stimulus to do things better, faster, and a little bit differently. Yeah. How has that worked?
I think there's almost a nice bit of rubbing off of both sides together, because there's a piece of maybe move a bit faster, it doesn't need to be 100% perfect, all of these things. And on the flip side, there's a whole raft of wonderful elements that come from our Japanese employees that also can cross-pollinate amongst the organization. I think the big piece is, are we giving people the space and the environment to feel like they can lean in, step forward, contribute in a psychologically safe way? And I think that's even more important for the Japanese organization than perhaps from some of our other nationalities that work here. Is, can I feel safe? Do I feel an environment where I can speak up? Do I trust that that's not going to be judged, ridiculed? I won't be embarrassed. All of those elements, and I think that becomes very important. What I love about our nationality mix here is when you go out into the floor and you see people working together, I love seeing this mishmash and friend units and colleague units forming cross-nationality, cross-age groups, because they're spending time together. I think one of the challenges of a larger organization is it can be a bit lonely. As you said, you can work in your silos and just in your groups. And when I head out to Taiwan or I go to our Korean office, those are smaller organizations and it feels different. Everyone knows each other a little bit more. They're spending a bit more time together. So we're trying to create those similar feel of a smaller organization in some of the groups that we're setting up, or these cohort connections that we're doing, to try and break down some of those big barrier organizations that you get when you've got a lot of people that sit on the ground.
Well, you very kindly attended a lunch for Joe Hart, our global CEO, yesterday, run by the Economist Intelligence Economics Unit Network, I should say. And I was talking to him about business cards. And naturally, he didn't bring enough.
Yes.
Even though I told him what they would think in America is enough and what I think is enough of it proved to be a little bit different. But anyway, and I said, well, look, Joe, the point about the business card is for a Japanese person, it tells them at what level of polite language they need to engage the person, because it'll tell them the status of the company. You might be a small company, they're a big company, or they've got bigger status. The person might be older than you, or the person might be senior to you, and it helps them to know what pitch of my polite use of keigo, polite language, I need to apply to this person so I don't insult them either too high or too low. That's why the business card is important. It's not about the details, it's about who they are. So this sensitivity around dealing with different types of people, is important. And this is where diversity, I think, helps to broaden that out a little bit. So you're not afraid to meet people because, I don't know how to speak to them. I'm not sure. I'm cautious to speak to them because I don't know them. As opposed to, if you're in business, you want to know people. You're coming, you said before, from a sales background. Know, like, and trust is the basis. So you've got to be known and liked and trusted, right? So that's always a bit of an impediment in Japan. But what about female leadership here? Because this has been a big topic in Japan for a long time. We don't see much progress really. But how have you gone here in BAT in terms of helping to have more female leadership?
So I think in Japan, if you look at the numbers, depending on what report you look at, roughly 9% of female leadership in management positions in Japan across the board. We're 40 here in BAT Japan. And my leadership team, my cohort, we're 50-50. So we are...
You're way out in front of the...
I think one of the pieces for me, having grown up through, sales and marketing functions and CPG from the 90s, one of the things I always struggled with is you couldn't see yourself at the table because it was very male dominated. And I think particularly in Japan, one of the things that's critical is that female talent in this country can start to see successful female talent doing well. Her name escapes me, but the woman who's fairly recently taken over as Japan Airlines head, I read her story and it's, I'm on the sidelines cheering for her to be successful. But if you read about some of the things that were said about her when she took over that role, she was referred to as an alien, an anomaly, a mutant in Japan. How could she do this? She didn't come from this university. She didn't grow up this way. So there's some real challenges of women in Japan to be able to be successful. The starting point for us is making sure that we've got the right environment, the right policies, the right flexibility to allow women of all ages and all approaches to how they want to build their career to be successful. Create the right environment.
Well, 40% is it's a critical mass at some point that has really bloomed into a substantial proportion. They say half of your direct reports are female. That's incredible. And that's not because you're female. I'm sure they were like that or pretty close to that before you even got here. So BAT over the years has managed to create that culture to allow women to step up. And as we know, if a man has 60% of the job requirements, he'll put his hand up.
I'm ready.
But the lady has to have 90% in Japan, particularly. And I'll tell you right now, I'm so pleased to have you on the podcast as a female leader, simply because I want to have more balance in my podcast, to have more female voices about leading here. And I'll tell you right now, I run into this sort of 90%, 60% problem. Very few guys say no. And the ones who say no are usually Scandinavians. I've just noticed that. I don't know what's going on there. I'm not Scandinavian. I have to find out what's going on there. Invariably, they'll be like that. They're demure. But a lot of women will say no. They'll say no. And it's this 90%, 60% thing, I think. And I say, well, listen to the podcast and you'll see it's I'm not a journalist, it's just a chat. But they're voting with their feet not to participate. So we have had this problem in Japan of a lot of women will look at their bosses who are run ragged, working ridiculous hours, they've got kids, they've got aging parents, and saying, do I really want that responsibility with the lifestyle I've got now? No, forget it. So somehow BAT, you've managed to give them capacity to have a lifestyle where they can have kids and aging parents and whatever, and have a career. That's really a breakthrough. What was the thing that you think made that work?
I do think it comes down to starting with workplace environment, workplace policies. You have to create an environment that can allow flexibility and allow the right kind of benefits, the right approaches, and the right flexibility for women to be able to be successful. You make a really good point. If you look at the Economist Glass Ceiling Index, it's 27 of the OECD countries of how women are doing. Japan is second last, and Korea, which is also in my patch, is last. And a lot of that's to do with, it's not that women aren't ambitious. It's not that they're not, they're going to university at higher levels. All of the things are in their favor, but there's still quite a patriarchal approach to what's expected of a woman to also be carrying a lot of the burden of those home roles that need to be played. What we're trying to do is make sure that we give flexibility to allow those roles to be done and also build a career and be successful. So we have hybrid working here. We ask people to come in for 3 days a week, but you can choose the 2 days that you work from home with flexibility on hours, when you show up, when you leave. So if you need to do, if you have a family, you need to do pick up. This goes for men as well. You can go and do those things. Policies in place that allow the right approach when some of those major life stage moments happening, both for men and women. I always think the policies that when we're thinking about women in the workforce, it benefits the entire organization, because actually we're starting to see more, particularly in Japan, men wanting to play a much more active role in their families' lives, wanting to play that role of, I'm not just the salary man that goes to work and then come
goes
home
to
late
golf
at
on
night.
Sunday and doesn't see the family at all.
We're seeing a huge,
grandparents' generation.
Absolutely, it's changing, and so our policies are for everyone. But we're finding that it really makes a big difference with women. And I think your other point that you make, women have to be encouraged. I've read it, and you're not the first person to say it, that men are like, pick me, I'm ready. And women will go, I've got 10% more to go. Let me work on that before I go.
I'm not going to learn on the job.
No,
I'm not going to
let me get
build
myself
my way
ready.
into it.
Yep.
I have to be perfect before I step up.
And so I think sponsorship, coaching, the right mentors, the right connections are critical for women to have that confidence to be able to go, I'm going to go. And I think that's the biggest thing I say to the younger women coming through our organisation. For me, the breakthroughs in my career was when I took chances. The move to China, that was a frightening and big piece. I'd only ever worked in Australia and New Zealand. They're different countries. Forgive me, anyone that's from those countries. Very similar. You could almost say it's the same. China was this, as you say, totally different. But I know for a fact if I hadn't taken that move to China, I would not be where I am in my career today. Sometimes you've got to back yourself. And I think sometimes you need someone standing behind you saying, I'm backing you, go.
Any other advice you'd give aspirant female potential leaders to step up? I
think there's, and I say this very openly, I think that we are, as women, sometimes our own worst enemy in terms of how we talk to ourselves and what we kind of project.
About imposter syndrome?
100%. I think there's this, there's this little thing on your shoulder that goes, didn't do that as well as you could have done. Have you thought, not quite there yet. We've got to be kinder in how we talk to ourselves. I think if you have a presentation, a lot of the women that I talk to go, I did this and this one thing didn't quite go right, and that will be the thing that they focus on.
Therefore, the whole thing was a failure.
The whole thing was a failure. What about those 9 things that were amazing? So we've got to do a better job at talking to ourselves about the 9 things versus the one thing. And it's not again, I say this having worked now for 26 years, but that's critical. We've got to start being a champion for ourselves without being so, self-critical, which can be a tendency that we have. So I think that's a critical one. Start talking a little bit more kindly to ourselves.
If you got a phone call from a colleague, a friend, or contact and said, "Hey, Emma, I've been given this big job in Japan. I'm moving up here. I'm going to run the organisation, but I don't speak Japanese. I don't understand anything about Japan. Give me some advice on how I could be effective here as a leader." What advice would you give them?
I think the first thing I would say is take the time initially to immerse. Make sure that you start to understand some of the cultural nuances. Make sure that you meet as many people in the team and that they know you, eyeball you. You talked about it. Doing it virtually is tough. Someone seeing you and seeing how you operate can make a huge difference in building that psychological safety.
That sounds great in a perfect world, but often headquarters, have got a different agenda.
Yes.
They're sending you to Japan to fix Japan, and they've got the clock on.
Yes.
You're like, okay, your clock's running.
Yeah.
You've been there 2 months, nothing's changed, you know, and so you've got this pressure. How do you think about handling headquarters and giving yourself that option to immerse? Because often you don't have the freedom.
No, it's a really good point. I think, every market says, we're different. I'm different. Yeah. You need to come and see us. We're different. I think it is genuinely true of Japan. And I know that's true within the BAT organization. It's different here. The market environment's different. Consumers are different. And I think one of the things that we've been doing, and it puts some pressure on the organization, but we invite people to come and spend time. We invite our senior teams to come and do market visits, to come and spend time here. And my job as the leader of this organization is to educate, to make sure that I'm helping to bring understanding to what's going on.
Also,
I know that there's things
sometimes, when they come here, if they can meet with the buyers, they can meet with the clients, because you and I might say it.
Yes. But
and they go, oh, yeah.
Correct.
But if the client says exactly
go
the same
and meet a retailer,
words,
go and meet a distributor.
It's going to be, oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yes, take that under consideration. It's interesting, isn't it? Who's the messenger here can have a big impact on how they accept the message.
Yeah. I think there's another one, even particularly with our global marketing team, is don't just come here and hear it from us. Go and meet consumers. Sit and spend some time. Do consumer connects. Understand what they're saying. And it starts to kind of filter in. I think the other piece of advice I would give, and again, it's more of a timing thing. Things that I think I could do in Australia in 6 months might take a year here or even longer. And you need to a little bit reset your expectations. And it's not because there's not a desire to do things better or to have an impact. It's just that journey you need to go through, taking the organization forward and building belief and understanding around the changes that are going to happen. And it's my one, I'm champing at the bit to see how much more quickly we can move. But actually you'll build a lot more confidence if you can maybe slow that down slightly. And what was interesting, you talked about the lunch that we had as part of the Economist Network this week. I think it was really encouraging for me to hear not just other Western companies, but other Japanese companies saying, we have the same challenge. I was talking, to some of the people that were sitting with me, and they're saying, I wanted to do it in 2 years. It'll probably take me 4, but we'll get there, and we'll have a really good result at the end of it. So I think there's a reset that's needed. Doesn't mean that you don't push, and it doesn't mean that you don't set really great ambition.
We grew up in business being rewarded for speed and initiative, right?
Yes.
And you've been promoted into bigger jobs because you're a very high-powered, a very ambitious, energized person, working at speed and thinking, how can we make this go even faster? Whereas here, nobody gets rewarded for being fast, but you get absolutely hammered if you make a mistake.
Yes.
So the punishment downside for you is massive compared to the upside that you did something faster or better. Yes. So that's a cultural thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And again, it comes back to that psychological safety.
So how do you treat mistakes here then on that basis? Because you were talking about that before. If you put it in oh yes, we see mistakes as learning. Someone makes a mistake and their boss gives them a whack in the ear. Oh, now I get how it works. So I'm going to keep myself quiet. So how do you actually make that a reality? People can believe it.
We talk about celebrating the reds.
The reds?
The reds, which are things that, green, 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 red.
Okay, right.
But the big piece is always we can have a mistake or things don't go exactly to plan once. The big piece is, what did I learn from that? How do we ensure that doesn't happen again in the same way or in a slightly different way? And we take that forward. So it's about understanding things can happen. Nothing will always go your way. That's not life. That's not the reality of working in any business. But my big piece with the team on the ground is we can have a mistake. We can have things that don't go perfectly. What are we learning and how are we making sure that the next time we don't make those same mistakes again? That means we're growing. That means we're moving forward. One of the big things I try and talk about is this is about progress, not perfection. Now in Japan, that's super challenging, right?
That's very challenging here, isn't it?
Because perfection is the minimum. It should be perfect. I am a craftsman. I am an owner of this perfect thing and I'll do it perfectly. But actually what we need to start thinking more about is, am I making progress? Are we moving it forward in the direction that we want to go? It's not an easy one, but that consistency of messaging is critical to make progress.
I was reading Leo Lewis's article in the FT this morning about Japan, about this customer perfectionism and requirement, and how this is a challenge for Japan, going forward to in fact, they're talking about customer harassment of workers, and this is going to be something they're looking at. Was like, this is, customer harassment is a new terminology. I haven't heard that before, and so it's interesting how that's going to change. But if you think about any habits that you've accumulated over the years, which you've found for you have been really game changers or very important for your career success.
Yeah. So I think I'm always quite glass half full. That's my.
That's not a surprise. Listen to you.
It takes a lot to probably get me into that glass half empty zone, but I do think it's. Sometimes we can be I can feel quite challenged about, maybe not getting to the moonshot. But again, I think this progress piece, this celebrating the milestones, this recognizing and acknowledging that progress is absolutely critical. I also think, and again, this has become a bit of a bumper sticker, but I think one of the most important things to build a successful career is having resilience. And resilience for me is about when things don't go your way, how can you pick yourself up by the scruff of the neck and quickly move into, okay, what's the learning? How do I move forward? Easier said than done. And I think over my 26 years, that's built. And I think that's built through experience and a few kind of knocks. But that for me means that you're continuing to be open to learning. You're continuing to be curious about what else can happen and benefiting from that. So I think that's a big piece. I also think sometimes you just need a sounding board. You need someone to be able to say, I'm frustrated by this, or I'm not sure about this. What's your view? So I think it's important to have a few people in your business life or in your personal life that you can have those honest conversations with.
And that's interesting because, as a leader, who do you talk to? Because you can't talk to your staff about your problems.
Yes.
You can't talk to your boss about your problems. Often you can't talk to your spouse about your problems because they're not working in the business. Who do we talk to?
Yeah. For me, it's, I've got some great colleagues who've become friends from my previous life who I value, who I think are incredibly smart human beings and switched on. And they're people I'll tap into now and again. I've also found that there's some fabulous people that I've connected with here at BAT who I can have great conversations and connections with. So I think it's about finding people you're comfortable with and that you have trust with. It's so critical. I think, sometimes letting something out lowers that pressure point that you can be feeling if you're internalizing and keeping it to yourself. And I would say that that's for CEOs all the way down to, graduates that have just started out. You need to be able to be confident, to have a bit of vulnerability and have a bit of openness in terms of how you connect.
I think that's
We're not all Superman, yeah?
Well, that's a hard one, I think. Now, I'm going to generalise and say men. Certainly Australian men, it's soldier on down there.
100%.
It's never admit the weakness, hide all the mistakes and never show any vulnerability. That's the culture, macho culture. And yet, as you say, if you're going to be able to open up to people, there's got to be a high degree of trust there. So I think often for men, we struggle with that generally as a male gender, that we're not good at doing that. And I don't think Japan's that much different either.
Yes.
So any hints on how men, you think about there's a lot of population of men in this company, to help men become a little bit more comfortable being vulnerable and being more resilient?
Yes. It's, as you say, I don't think it's unique to any country or any culture. I think, and it's not just I think people in general feel like they need to put the armor on and go out into battle on a day-to-day basis. But and I read a lot about this and I've had my own experience with it, when you genuinely connect, when you tell someone I don't know or I'm not sure or I'm struggling, you open up a completely different way to engage and to build trust and to build that psychologically safe space. It's not an easy one, but I think when people see it enacted, when people can hear about it happening, and so that's important that it starts, at any level, but important for me too, you start to filter that into an organisation. I know it's not easy, and I think, you talk about Australian men. I think there's and again, I've been reading, there's a real challenge around mental health, in the country and with young men. And how do we give them an opportunity to feel that they can be whoever they want to be? And it doesn't have to be boxed into this. This is how it was in the past. And I think the more we can see people doing that, the more we can connect to doing that. It's interesting, we've got our my equivalent in our South region is an Australian, and he started doing these wonderful connections into his organisation where he's having very open discussions around his career and how he's navigated that with his family and maybe choices he would have made slightly differently. And the feedback that he gets from having those connections is unbelievable. You're just resetting the baseline a little bit about how people can be and how they can connect. So it sounds simple, and I know it's not easy. You have to just start. You have to have one person that's willing to put their hand up and say something. And the impact, that ripple effect that you talked about, can be unbelievably powerful.
What's your definition of leadership, Emma?
I think it's about being able to articulate a vision and a direction that's compelling and that's inspirational that people can get behind. I think it's about being able to create and support environments where people can thrive and deliver what you need them to. I think it's the ability to coach and connect and provide that support. And I think it has absolutely nothing to do with a title or a business card. I think we all have a role to play in an organisation of doing all those things that I just talked about. Whether you are just newly into your career and starting out, or whether you've been working for 3 decades and, you know, seasoned and scarred, I think we all have that role to play. I think we talk a lot about servant leadership. I think, perhaps companies that were successful 30 years ago was you had a director at the top who said, do this, do this, do this, and everyone jumped in line and got it done. I think the younger generation coming through wants something different now. And so I think leaders at the top need to think about how they can step back, give space, support, coach. It's not the old way anymore that's going to be successful into the future. I think that's it.
Emma, thank you.
Thank you.
I
It's
know
been
you've
great
got a
catch
lunch
up.
appointment to
Thank
get to,
you.
so I
I
won't
do. I've
hold
got to
you
hang out
longer.
with my buddies.
Thank you. So please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.